All right, so everybody, this is the start of a Revelation study. My name is Argle Smith, and I'm super happy to be here with you, walking you through the book of Revelation. A very complicated book, a very mysterious book, but at the end of the day, a book that is full of a blessing for us as believers in Christ. I am a Christian and an evangelical Christian, and have a degree at John Brown University with Biblical and Theological Studies. I'm currently taking my Master's of Theology at Asbury Theological Seminary right now, so do have a little bit of qualification to do this. So I probably spent about 1,000 hours already studying the book of Revelation. I lead a Bible study in Spain, and I'm a missionary in Spain. And so Revelation was the last book we studied, and everybody enjoyed it so much that I thought I would offer it online. And so I created this YouTube channel, and I'm really excited that you are with us. Our ministry, if you ever want to look it up, it's called Haggai's Harvest. www.haggaisharvest.com. Of course, this is not going to be a typical Bible study. It's more like a biblical study. So it's kind of more like a classroom type setting, where it's a lot more involved than what you would probably get at your typical Bible study at church or whatever. Let's see where I want to go from here. One of the things I think is really important as we begin to study the book of Revelation is to realize that we all come from different theological, different denominational backgrounds, and it's important that as you study Revelation especially, or any book of the Bible, that you take what you any preconceived notions, and you just for a moment set them aside. So we all come with these history of studying Revelation, like things that have influenced over the years, things like maybe the Left Behind series, maybe you've read those books or watched some end-time movies. And all I'm asking for you during the study is to set those aside, put Left Behind in a box, close that box, and when we're done with the study, you can come back to it. I want you to pretend that you have never studied Revelation before, even if you maybe have studied it 5 or 10 times. Just pretend for this Bible study that you have never studied it before. Also, I want you to pretend, which is going to be difficult in the beginning if you're not familiar with the first century church, that you are living at the end of the first century. You're a Christian, and you're one of the audience members of this letter of Revelation. And so those are the two things I want you to pretend for this Bible study. Too often, one of the mistake we make in Bible studies is that we want to jump right ahead to life application. And I call that the here and now. So too often we want to jump into the here and now, what this Bible means for me here and now in my life. And that is a big mistake that we often make in studying the Bible. Because first, before we know the here and now, we have to fully understand the then and there. So the only way for us to understand the here and now is to know the then and there. And what do I mean by the then and there? I mean the background. There's an entire historical background that we have to study when we study any scripture at all. We can't take it out of context. We will always look deeply into the culture, into the history, and into the events that surround the book. We will look at the life situation of the author of Revelation and the audience of Revelation, of the text. In theology, there's a German word that we use. It's called Sitzenleben. And so what that means is revelation does not exist in a vacuum. It is written by a certain person for a certain reason at a certain time in history for a particular audience. And if you don't know the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, or the how concerning our author and our author's audience, their Sitzenleben, their situation in life, you'll never fully understand Revelation no matter how many times you read it. You may read it 100 times and you'll never be able to understand what it means for your life. And so I use an acronym to help us to understand the Sitzenleben that I learned from one of my Bible professors at John Brown University, Dr. Jim Blankenship. It's called Persia. And each letter in Persia stands for something different. And so you really need to remember Persia because we're going to be talking about it a lot. The P in Persia stands for political, E, economical, R, religious, the S, social, I, intellectual, and the A stands for artistic. So each of these things are questions that we're going to be asking about the text in the background to help us get to the here and now, because we need to know those things. If we want to interpret what those things mean for our lives, we have to understand what it meant for them back then. And the A on artistic, that doesn't just mean pottery. That also is looking at literary devices that they used in the text, things like chiasms and different poetic features that they might have used, like inclusios, to express ideas inside Revelation. And also by the P, political, I also include things in there like military and different things like that, because political power is not just the power behind the political is often the military. So, but Persia is something easy to remember. It's something that you can go back to time and time again, and it's a tool that I now use in all of my Bible studies. So getting to the author now, a lot of people, they just take things for granted. They might look at their Bible commentary and it says that John wrote the book of Revelation, but how do we know John wrote the book of Revelation, and how do we know which John wrote the book of Revelation? But to begin, I will say that the author of Revelation is the Apostle John, the same John that Jesus loved, the disciple Jesus loved, who wrote the Gospel according to John. It's the same author. And John, his father was a fisherman. His dad was named Zebedee, and his brother was named James. I like to say that James and John, his dad's probably business was called Zebedee and Sons or something along those lines. But John eventually became the disciple of John the Baptist, the forerunner of Jesus Christ, the last of the Old Testament prophets, so to say. John was one of Jesus's first disciples, and he makes up the inner circle of Jesus's core apostles. So Peter, James, and John makes up the three core groups of Jesus's followers. And tradition holds that the Roman authorities tried to boil John in a pot of oil, but he somehow survived that. And then they imprisoned him on the island of Patmos, which is a small island off the coast of Western Turkey, and so which biblical scholars call Asia Minor today. So John wrote several letters on this island, and Revelation is one of them. And John was the bishop of the churches in Asia Minor, this area of Turkey today. Um, a bishop is basically an elder of an elder, or an overseer. And there were 7 churches that John was writing this letter to, the 7 churches of this province in Asia Minor. So John was the last apostle alive. And so it is possible that Revelation is the youngest book in the Bible. And so John wrote his gospel account. Uh, in my opinion, he probably wrote his gospel account after Revelation. So either the gospel according to John or Revelation is the youngest book in the Bible. But they were written very close together, very close. John died a few years after writing this letter, Revelation. He died around the year 100 AD. And so we are all very familiar with the Apostle John. But let me ask you this important question. How do we know which John, or how do we even know that the Apostle John wrote Revelation? Where's our proof? Can we prove that John wrote the book of Revelation? And so John was a very common name in the first century, and Revelation never mentions which John wrote this letter. When the apostle died, he passed the church tradition and authority into the hands of the apostolic church fathers. John was the last apostle alive, and so when the apostles, before they died, they started establishing bishops or overseers over the early church. And when the apostle died, he passed his authority over to his protege, Polycarp. Because when John died, there was still no New Testament. Yes, the letters had all been written, but no church had a New Testament. Some churches might have had 1 or 2, 3, maybe they had the gospel accounts, but no one church had all of the biblical texts. They were scattered all over the Roman Empire. So that's a big deal. So the church had to survive with lots of schisms and heresies. And how do you keep that pure if there is no New Testament to guide you along? Well, one of the ways that happened was by appointing bishops in the line of the apostles, and church historians call this the apostolic church fathers. So there were many sects rising up within the church, like the Gnostics and different sects. And the church fathers, they had to keep the faith pure. They had to defend the faith. The very first church fathers were apologists, defending the Christian faith. There was attacks coming against Christianity from the outside, the Roman Empire, the Jewish people were attacking Christianity, persecuting them, kicking them out of synagogues. The Roman Empire was persecuting Christianity sporadically across the kingdom. It wasn't a kingdom. It wasn't an empire-wide persecution, but sporadically there was intense persecution in some places. And so there was both internal and external attacks happening on the Christians during this time period. And the church fathers had to ensure that they kept this faith pure without a New Testament. And so groups like the Gnostics, they almost took over the church in the 2nd century and 3rd century. So John's most important student was Polycarp. This was John's protege, so to say. Polycarp was also a bishop in Asia Minor, and he studied directly under John. One of the greatest apologists of the faith against the Gnostics was a student of Polycarp. His name was Irenaeus. Irenaeus studied directly under Polycarp. And so we learn from Irenaeus that Polycarp taught him personally that the Apostle John was the author of the book of Revelation. So when we study the Sitzumleben, the life situation, there are two kinds of evidence that we can talk about. There's the internal evidence and there's the external evidence. Internal evidence is the information we can learn from the Bible itself and from the Revelation passage itself. For example, from the Bible, we can learn that a man named John wrote Revelation. We can learn this from the text. But we could not know which John for sure unless we had more evidence. And so the writings of Irenaeus would be what we call external evidence. So we learn from him and others which John wrote Revelation, which is the Apostle John. I know we are covering a lot of information today for some of you, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video now. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the YouTube channel, and I'll try to get back to you. And so this is my first video. I'm super excited to be offering this to you. And when we come back, we'll pick up where we left off over the rest of the background for Revelation. So we'll see you here in a few.